War and Revolution, section Ukraine, Bengal, and Ireland. Reference has been made in connection with the Ukraine to a famine holocaust, death by starvation deliberately inflicted on a rebellious people by Stalin. But even were this to be true, the comparison with the Judeocide would be completely misleading. More satisfactory as a term of comparison would be the events that unfolded in Ireland in 1846-8. In the aftermath of a disease that destroyed the potato crop, Ireland lost 2.5 million people out of a total population of 9 million. Half of them emigrated to Canada and the USA, while the other half died of starvation. Charles Edward Trevelyan, who was charged by London with monitoring the developing situation and dealing with it, detected in this terrible famine the hand of an all-wise providence, seeking to solve the problem of Ireland's imbalance between population and food. For this, the British politician has sometimes been branded as a proto-Eichmann, protagonist of a tragedy that should be regarded as the prototype of 20th century genocides. Instead, we should first of all bear in mind the policy traditionally followed in the unfortunate island by its conquerors, whom we have seen banking on the rebels dying of starvation. We are also reminded of the policy toward Native Americans pursued in the USA, not coincidentally frequently compared with British policy in Ireland. And Trevelyan's statements display some similarity to the previously cited view of Franklin, according to whom extermination of the Indians formed part of the design of Providence. It is true that British policy now proposed not to erase an ethnic group, but to reduce it drastically, without resorting to additional tools to those employed by God. But it remains the case that the mass starvation of a people long assimilated by the dominant British classes to other colonial populations was regarded as providential. But even this second term of comparison is inadequate. On the one hand, Ireland was not the theater of a pitiless civil war in 1846-8. On the other, the Ukrainians were not subject to permanent racialization. A comparison might instead be made with India's experience between 1943 and 44. Following the Japanese invasion of Burma, Bengal, already deprived of the ability to feed itself, found itself in the front line. Implementing their denial policy, the British military authorities sought to put the region's food supplies out of the reach of any potential future enemy advance, with catastrophic consequences in the event for the civilian population. The reports filed by U.S. journalists were controlled by the censors, who erased all reference to death by starvation, hunger, or bodies slumped in the street. In February 1944, however, the U.S. Congress authorized the UNRRA, United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, to send food to India. But Churchill denied that people in the British colony were suffering hunger. Beginning of long quote. A deadly game was being played. Everyone knew that people were starving in Bengal, but the government of India, representing Churchill and British interests, refused to request UNRRA assistance. At the same time, the British in India paid UNRRA a contribution of $24 million, which made one of the poorest countries on earth the sixth largest contributor. The human cost of the Bengal famine between 1943 and 44 was 3 million lives. End of long quote. Should we relate the position adopted by the British government to its struggle against the independence movement and denounce a case of famine holocaust in this instance as well? In reality, the interpretive key to the events is furnished by a declaration by U.S. Vice President Henry Wallace. He explained the lack of food aid for a population mown down by starvation thus, quote, "The more food we can put into Russian stomachs, the more American blood will be saved." End quote. In the context of a titanic world war, the Bengal famine became a negligible quantity. Lack of respect for a colonial population and irritation at its unrest would not appear to have played a significant role. An analogous conclusion can be reached in the case of the Ukrainian tragedy. It unfolded during a pitiless civil war at the height of the Second 30 Years' War. Rightly or wrongly, the USSR regarded collectivization of agriculture as the only option in the face of a conflict and aggression it believed to be imminent. Famine struck with equal cruelty in certain parts of Russia. Yet the state grain reserves created for war were not drawn on. The aid measures decided in February 1933 aimed primarily to ensure sowing in the regions hit by hunger, and this in expectation of a new international conflict. End section.